Northwest Now is supported, in part, by viewers like you. Thank you.
2 appellate court decisions rule against advocates for government transparency, and now the concept of legislative privilege may wind up back in the Supreme Court. It's a battle with the legislature that just won't end. Tonight, our annual look at the declining health of government transparency with the Washington Coalition for Open Government, and a look back at 14 years of Northwest Now's open government programs in recognition of Sunshine Week, the annual celebration of government transparency. Your right to public records and open public meetings next on Northwest Now. It's the Friday before Sunshine Week, the annual celebration of government transparency. Sunshine Week is celebrated every year at the Washington Coalition for Open Government's annual Sunshine Breakfast. As a member of the Washington Coalition for Open Government, I was honored to MC that event this morning and also accept the organization's Anderson Award on behalf of myself, Northwest Now, and KBTC Public Television for the 14 years we've done this program, which despite the very serious and somewhat dry topic, we've tried to have a little fun with.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Ever feel like the government isn't really acting, well, transparently? You're not alone. Why does the average person care whether or not we can go down and take a look at a government record?
Well, in our form of government, the people are actually in charge.
So we need to be very vigilant in trying to protect the public records and open meetings laws.
I am not a number. I am a free man.
Most dystopian stories involve the power of information, those who wield the power, and those who lack the access to the secret files.
And without disclosure, without transparency, the truth is, for all the talk, we cannot know whether a tax break is actually delivering value.
A public record is a public record regardless of what device it's on, whether it's owned by the city or the state or the county or owned personally. If it's a public record concerning public business, it's public.
You've received a CAT scan of the legislature's soul. What does it reveal?
Well, I think it reveals the extent to which the legislature really values public input in the legislative process.
About zero, then, is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers?
I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Jack Nicholson said that famous line in A Few Good Men. But in the Washington State Legislature, some lawmakers seem to be thinking it.
We get it right out of the gate by keeping the records, organizing the records, and making them available.
I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
Well, the media and open government advocates have been shouting about public records for years. But as my little granddaughter would say, it's not working. Washington's... Yeah, it's been a lot of television, and I want to thank the many guests who took the time to participate in all the open government programs we've done over the years, both here in the studio and when we traveled to them all across the state. Joining us now are WashCog President and former Seattle Times editor Mike Fancher, WashCog's Executive Director Colette Weeks, and WashCog Communications Specialist and Public Records Advocate Jamie Nixon. Mike, I want to start with you. Just this year, as I track this from year to year, my tickler file on open records, problems, issues, lawsuits, failures to comply, and Open Public Meetings Act failures along the same line. I'm not kidding you. If I were to print it out, it'd be that thick. There are so many cases and so many issues with this. I guess I want to ask you kind of the big philosophical question, and that is it fair to say that the PRA and the OPMA are pretty much under attack, under siege right now like never before?
I think it's absolutely okay to say that. I think that's what it feels like to us. I would add to this notion of how much there is. We're running on fumes. I mean, this has been a really rough year. There's so much going on, and we're still standing. And we've had some victories, but it's tougher and tougher every year. There's just no question of that. And 2 years ago, we put out a report specifically on the Public Records Act and concluded that the public's right to know was eroding, And a year ago, we updated that, and we said the erosion is now looking like an entire assault. And as I was thinking about this for this show, my attitude is right now we have a mindset problem among public servants. Back when the Open Government, Public Records, Public Meetings Acts were passed, there was a preamble that said, the people of this state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies which serve them. The people in delegating authority do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. That attitude is pretty much gone in state government and local governments. That's the concern that I have. Somehow, and we believe the people do care, and they still want this, but the public servants aren't providing it. And it's an uphill battle. I
would almost say that I think you make a great point, and the way I would put it is it seems to me that the burden of proof is actually flip-flopped. It used to be, I think the mindset was, and the values were of the people who passed the original act in 1972 was, listen, it's an open record, unless for some extenuating circumstance we prove otherwise.
Right.
I think it's just the opposite now, which is, no, this baby's locked down. These are government records. They're not for your discussion. Now, there may be a case or two where we have to release them for a very good reason. It seems to me the whole thing has done this.
And the attitude is that it's too much trouble. It's too costly. It's a burden rather than being a basic public service, like a utility. And frankly, you need to go back to square one on that. There was a bill introduced in the legislature this year. We were asked if we would participate in a task force that would modernize the Public Records Act. We said sure. Then we saw the bill, and the language in the bill wasn't modernizing in the way that we would think of technologies or processes. It was basically making it harder for people to get the records. And fortunately, I don't think that bill is going to end up going anywhere, but it's that sense that even a process that's supposed to be a positive turns out to be a threat. We'd love to have a task force that looks at how to modernize the PRA. We'd like to participate in that, but we want to actually have it improve access.
Right.
Not destroy.
I'm sure the legislature would be happy to lock you into a room and lose the key. So that's
well,
just
it's like the Sunshine Committee they created in 2017, 2018, to look at which of these exemptions under the law can we get rid of. And all this time, essentially, they've done nothing with the recommendations from the committee that they created.
Which now number either close to or more than 700, which is amazing to me.
Originally 10.
Yeah, right. Colette, tell people why this matters and how in your role now as the executive director of WashCog, you see the top priorities strategically when it comes to things like membership and communication and trying to enlist some allies in the legislature. Why is it important, and kind of what's your thinking on strategy here in light of what Mike talks about, the siege that this is under?
Well, it's important because our entire structure of government is about the people. They're supposed to be working for us, and they have to be reminded regularly, but now it almost seems as if they're fighting back. And, talking about attitude, I'd say it's even a culture change. It's dramatic. And I don't think that the people feel that way. And I'm afraid people might start letting people know how they feel in the midterms. But that remains to be seen. But what we need going forward, what we would like to see happen, is that we can stop playing defense, because we have been under attack and we have been fighting back, just trying to tread water, just keep up. But where we need to go, and what I see us doing in the very near future, is becoming more of an offense player.
Yeah.
We need change. We want modernization. There are a lot of things that we want, but to do that, we need to grow. With the Washington Coalition for Open Government, we need to grow. We want more people under the tent. We want ordinary Washingtonians, to just stand together and remind everybody who holds office and everybody who works for government that they're people too, but they just work for us.
Yeah. A big piece of that strategy is communications. Jamie, I typically kind of put this down toward the end where, hey, tell us your website and how to get involved. Not Not this time. That's going right to the top with your role and the things that you do. I would like you to hit this early and talk about all the channels that you're communicating on. I follow most of them, and where folks can find the Public Records Officer podcast, the newsletter, social. Lay that out for me,
Sure.
How people can interface with WashCog, which you've been doing a lot of work with.
Yeah, so the Public Records Officer podcast is something I started in July. We have a website that's very easy to find. It's just the Public Records Officer podcast.com. You can find us on X, Blue Sky, Instagram. You can find the podcast on most places where people get podcasts, so Apple, Google Play, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts, you will probably be able to find it quite easily. And on there, we try to tell the actual stories. I'm somebody who does requests. I care greatly about the issue. And when I find interesting, sometimes dumbfounding stories that come from this, I think it's important to tell people what they are. And I focus pretty much a lot of my work on how these requests are being processed, how the individuals who process them are doing them. So I'm not necessarily doing a request at DFW involving a hunting regulation of some kind, and then there's a story there. I've done requests on how are you handling the auto deletions of Teams chats.
Yes.
And so I'm looking for exactly how they're doing that, because I think there's we can gain a lot of information as to how they're doing it, which will help guide us as to what changes we might need in the future to make sure we're maximizing the democratic potential of the Public Records Act.
Where's the report on auto deletions, by the way, since I've got you? Where's the report on that?
There isn't one, in the sense that there was no public communication made that this was going to happen. There was a decision made in summer of 2021 by the agencies that are served by WATEC that essentially Teams chats creates too much data for us to go through and to search effectively and to exempt appropriately. So we're just going to label the entire channel transitory. We're going to try to train everybody to only put transitory messaging in there. And what they mean by transitory is stuff that isn't necessarily retainable. So we have a records retention law that mandates the retention of records based on content and function. What happened here was that they basically said, well, we're only going to, anything you put in there, we're going to label as transitory. We're not going to check it, and every 7 days it's just going to be destroyed. There was no report. Nobody told anybody this. It took a little bit for Shauna Sowersby, a reporter with Seattle Times now, and I to get over our ontological shock that this much records could be being destroyed this quickly without review, without audit, without any public knowledge or understanding. We're talking years of people doing litigation or public records requests where they probably weren't getting records they should have otherwise.
And my big concern, an ongoing and unlimited potential liability for the taxpayer to make it right.
That's correct. Yes. I just got an appeals decision from the appeals court that affirmed that individual citizens have no way to stop this. The way the rule, there's two different laws here. There's the Public Records Act and then there's the Records Retention Act. The only way to enforce the Records Retention Act is through a criminal situation where if you purposely violate or destroy a record before submit retention, you could be tried for a felony for that charge. Otherwise, you can't find standing with which to challenge what we think is a different kind of destruction, which is a systemic decision. Mm-hmm. As opposed to one person getting a little scared that a record going out might harm their reputation, and so they destroy it, which is not okay either.
Right.
But that's not the same thing as the entire system deciding.
Yes, carte blanche.
And the potential for abuse here, to me, seems so obvious that, well, if you're going to do something unethical or illegal in government, do it on this platform here. Because
or just negotiate.
Yeah, you could do it that way. But if you're going to do electronic communications, if you do it here, high likelihood nobody's ever going to find out you did it.
Yeah. Mike, the 800-pound gorilla in the room has been and remains legislative privilege, and for these questions, everybody can jump in on this. What is the status of that? Our friend Jamie, you're a litigant in this. Arthur West, who's going to be joining us here on Sunshine Month on Northwest Now, is going to be joining us. What is the status of legislative privilege? It seems like it's heading into reality. Give me the latest and your take on it.
Well, I would agree. It seems like it's on a path to be found to be a protection that the legislature has, or we call it legislative secrecy rather than legislative privilege. The legislature has claimed that under the state constitution, individual legislators have a personal privilege to withhold documents that otherwise would be public under the Public Records Act. We sued over that. Lost at the trial court level. our case is on appeal. You're going to be talking to Arthur West later, and his case just had a ruling. I'll leave it to you guys to talk about that.
It didn't go well, I'll say
It did
that.
not go. It did not go well. And it's again, if the courts are going to say this is not a court matter, this is the legislature's domain, then it just gets back to the mindset of the individual legislators, and when they run for office, what their commitment to openness is. Our colleague on the board and the state legislator, Jerry Paulette, this year won an award from the weekly newspaper publishers, their Freedom's Light Award. Jerry was telling me the story about how his father was a politician in New York and was so committed to openness, and so that's the spirit that Jerry brings to this. But if that's not what motivates you, if it doesn't beat in your heart that you're there to serve the public, and instead you've got all this work that's so important, you don't want the public to mess it up, and that seems to be a lot of what's going on there. So it's still an open issue. Where it goes from here, we'll have to wait and see. But sooner or later, the public is going to have to make a statement to their elected officials that we demand openness, accountability, and that's the thing that builds trust in the government processes.
I worry about efforts to modernize, also modernize the initiative process. Now, it doesn't appear that bill is going to happen this year, but Colette, talk a little bit about, do you think at some point you're going to be leading the charge for a statewide initiative to, I guess, reiterate in my view, plain language in the original act? And also, I would ask you this question about when it comes to the politics of this thing too, when it comes to lawmakers. I keep thinking that lawmakers are going to pay a price for kind of ignoring this state's libertarian streak. If you're not from here, you're not quite hip to the fact that we're a little libertarian. It hasn't worked out that way. So as you try to play offense a little bit in the legislature, how do you view some of those issues?
Well, the first thing I can tell you is that when it comes to the legislature, we've asked for a couple of years now if they would pledge, and we couldn't get a dozen. Not a dozen, well over 100. And a lot of the times what we hear is that they're waiting for the court decision. So they want to find out what they can get away with before they make the promise. So, if our hopes are that the legislature is going to do the right thing and pass a stronger law on the people's behalf, I think that we're waiting in vain. And I hope that the initiative process doesn't get weaker, because I don't know what that'll mean for the state of Washington.
Yeah, if I could jump in here
Sure.
on legislative privilege, I think it's one of the important things for people to understand about this decision, especially looking, the brief glimpse I got of the decision in Arthur's appeal today. All three of the judges were agreed on the separation of powers argument. And this should concern everybody at every level. If the legislature is claiming the court can't come in and compel them to hand over records, why does anybody think the court's going to be able to compel the City Council of Seattle to do the same? These are legislative bodies. If the court's going to say that there's a separation, the court can't compel this. We're talking about the evisceration of PRA, allowing the people of the state of Washington to check the work of their employees at every level of legislating. School boards, fire districts, city councils, county commissions, whatever it is. This is a really serious thing. This isn't just a legislative decision, I don't think. I think this is going to be a system-wide decision. There are over 1,800 legislative bodies in the state, and all of them are going to ask for this exemption.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's a little bracing, but I am definitely on board with the interpretation of that.
Well, and Tom, the truth of it is that local agencies, cities, counties, bureaus are hurting. They need help. They regard the Public Records Act as an unfunded mandate. They're told you have to do this, and they're not given any support to do that. And the biggest problems are they're not using the technology to help them organize records. Since they're not organized well, when they're requested, they can't find them and they can't deliver them. And then when they're challenged and end up having to pay penalties, which doesn't happen very often, but can, then they're basically saying, we can't afford this, and so therefore there can't be openness.
Yeah,
they need help. We'd like to help with that. We'd like to see training, better training for public officials. We'd like to have better training for the public, including civics education, so people understand what their rights are.
And some funding for that.
Absolutely.
So at all optimistic then about the new appointment of the Chief Transparency Counsel and Nick Brown's continued discussion about the importance of transparency in open government? It seems to me, I guess you could take a cynical view of that. Here's the fox watching the hen house, or you could take an optimistic view and say, well, at least they're acknowledging it and it's a value of the state and they've got somebody in place to do it. Help me interpret it.
Well,
Yep.
I was just going to say, Nick Brown's just been there for a year now, and he has worked in an administration that was at least more open than the one we've got now. There's hope. I would say that, are we giving him a pass on anything? No, we're still watching. The idea that they have an open government division now, and they've put Morgan in charge of it, great hopes. Great hopes.
Okay.
But we're watching. We're not,
Jamie?
Yeah, I would say that there's a fundamental issue at the in the foundational level here where the AG is operating in a place where there's a conflict of interest.
Yes.
And it's a glaring conflict in these situations when, when there was Bob Ferguson was AG. He was defending and helping craft the defense for the auto deletions. Once Nick Brown comes into office, they continue that same defense. So to me, I'm seeing, new boss, same as the old boss a little bit. But at the same time, we do expect the AG to represent the agencies, to protect the taxpayers' interest there. But the problem is, I think sometimes the AG forgets who their first client is.
Yeah.
And so the AG is in this space where they can identify an agency that probably has violated the Public Records Act. The AG is also empowered by statute to make a decision on settlements. AG does not have to go through all the court process to defend these things. The AG can say, look, Agency B, you screwed up here. We're going to settle this case out. And so there can be a less vociferous defense when obvious wrongs have been done. And I think I would like to see that kind of direction come out of the AG's office where they say, look, we're going to take a look at these cases a little bit more closely. And if the agencies have failed, you're going to be on the hook for it. Now, but I do also think that the legislature should address this conflict. I've got a story that I did on.
And can you train? Is that conflict though baked into the cake when they go to train taxing districts and local agencies? Is the goal correct? Are they teaching disclosure and the PRA, or are they teaching here's how to make sure you don't get hooked up in it?
So teaching legal risk versus over disclosure.
Yeah.
Managing legal risk. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's definitely, and it's not irrational for them to act in that way to some degree. But it's also one of the reasons why we don't personalize the penalties with PRA, right? Because yes, mistakes can be made. I don't want to necessarily hold any of it. If you're destroying records, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But if you honestly did a thing here where you didn't get it right, or just a human error happened, no, I don't think individuals should be held to account. But we don't hold individuals to account in that way. We hold the agencies to account for their failures, and so it would be nice to see the AG refocus the agency until the legislature can find a way to fix it. The legislature should step in here because there's just no place for. One of the stories I tell on my podcast is about a public records officer, one of the agencies, who tried to report destruction of records with the AG, and it appears that there was no investigation into that. I asked a PRO later, hey, are you guys trained on where to go if you see this kind of behavior? They are not. This person said that she did a whistleblower complaint with the state auditor's office. That whistleblower complaint wasn't acted on, and so she doesn't know where to go. Where is a public records officer supposed to go when the AG is working for the management of the agency, because that's who the client
Their
is.
first client.
But this person is trying to help uphold the law, and they're being ignored and now isolated as a result of that. So the AG, I think, really needs to think hard and clear about how they can best apply the law, and the legislature needs to step in and try to clarify some of this in some way so that the AG isn't reflexively just saying, well, we'll defend whatever they did. Well, what if they did something that harms the people, right? And not delivering records so that we can hold our government to account is a harm to the people.
Yeah. Mike, I want to talk to you about the exemptions to the PRA, now numbering, I think, close to or at 700 or above. How did we get from, I think you said originally there was a 10
10.
10 exemptions to 700. I mean, it's almost Orwellian that we have a Public Records Act, except for the 700 exemptions.
Yeah.
It's really something George Orwell could have written.
Yeah, it is. And I think that what happens is people go to the legislature with good intentions to speak to a problem. The problem then is not well defined and the solution is broad. This has been the history of what's been happening. And so good intentions, unintended bad consequences. Often the good intention includes trying to protect some segment of society.
For specific reasons.
Yeah. But then you close off insight to how the government is operating, and then you find out later that in fact the system is abusing the very people that it was intended to protect.
I think it's getting more naked than that, though. There was a bill in the legislature this year that pretty much exempts all the vital data, just carte blanche, to some degree to counteract the problem of vexatious requesters, people who are not requesting in a genuine and a real fashion for actual information. And Morgan even says that, told me that it's a small percentage of the requests are vexatious in his mind. Yet here they come with that lever to basically gut the PRA. I don't know what kind of a future that bill has as we sit here and discuss this today, but it's certainly on the table.
Well, and it's the notion of abusive requests. Who defines that?
Yeah.
You know, the spirit of the law initially was the government doesn't get to ask who you are or why you want these records or what you're going to do with them. The spirit was they're public records, you're entitled to have them. As we like to say, that public records don't belong to the government, they belong to the public.
Yeah.
But you're right, that's how it gets foreclosed. And Colette, do you want to mention that? Because you.
Yeah. So, for one thing, the whole word vexatious can be defined so many ways. But one thing the bill that you're talking about mentioned was that it would be kind of like a nuisance, frivolous.
Right.
These are words that are interpreted widely depending on where you're sitting. So somebody who is working in an office and they're being asked for a whole lot of documents, well, they might be very annoyed by the fact that they're having to do that, but does that make it frivolous? No. So the other problem is that this whole theme has become almost like propaganda because it's being bantered about across all of the state amongst every agency that we've spoken with. It just becomes this topic. And then you ask, what data, what numbers? We're not getting any. We don't hear, how much is this costing you? We're not talking about it in numbers. You watch anything anytime it comes up, it's just that there's this problem.
It's a problem.
It's undefined.
Yeah, we don't want to deal with it. It's a problem.
But it's a problem.
And I would say, I think a lot of the small agencies, we talked about this a little bit, but the legislature needs to resource this like the law enforcement that it is. You go talking about if, cops on the street law enforcement is waning and isn't doing it, isn't getting the job done. People will demand the funding and the resources for it. This is another form of law enforcement. The Public Records Act is a law enforcement act, and it enforces, an accountability on our elected officials and the people in power. The idea that, in legislative privilege, that here's a group of people who have been told very clearly by the people that we do not want you to work in secret, are now finding a court path to try to do that so they don't have to do it in a bill, which in 2018, we all remember what happened when the entire state said, no, you're not going to exempt yourself from the Public Records Act.
Yep.
They haven't crowed when they won their cases. They don't show up for the pleadings. They don't want to talk about it. People, in any line of work you're in, somebody has a supervisory role over you who gets to check your work. This is the legislature saying, we don't want you to be able to check our work.
Right.
Just trust us. Americans don't like to just trust their government. We never have. And I just think that in the resourcing at the local level, especially, we were talking about this earlier, that's a thing that really needs to happen. I agree that some of these requests are probably tough on these agencies.
But digitization, retention, organization, they need those kinds of resources.
And they need updated computer systems, updated software systems, just options on, maybe this system works better for our particular thing. I've heard talk about a singular place where anybody in any state for any agency wants to get a request, they would go through one portal. Maybe that's an idea that would save them money. It could be borne by the state, and all the requests would come through that portal. It could all be examined by all the stakeholders in it, and we could all keep an eye on it. There are solutions here.
Yeah. And the big thing, save time, because right now one of the big dodges on PRA fulfillment is the ticking of the clock.
Yes.
And if there's a hot topic now, it won't be 6 months from now, Mike, and you know that as a newspaperman. Right. Here are your records 6 months late. As those of you will recall from 6 months ago, this was a big story.
Well, people understand that the news media has an immediate need for the information that it's seeking. The public does too, in many instances. People have problems that they're trying to solve and questions that they need to have answers for. So the public urgency is quite similar to the media urgency.
Yeah. Anything I have left out before we wrap up with some final thoughts?
Well, having been, sort of a downer to kick this off at being exhausted and all the problems that we have, I do want to say we feel very good about where the coalition is. 2000, we just finished our annual report. 2005 actually had a lot of good things about us, starting with Colette becoming our new executive director and doing a great job. Our government committee, led by Robert McClure and our lobbyist Donna Christensen, has had the most work it's ever had to do, and I think the biggest impact. Our communications committee, led by George Erb, our board member, and Jim Simon, is doing strategic communication in a way we never have before, and we're doing more social media than we ever had before with real impact.
Yep.
And we're going to get better at that. But I think we feel like we're doing great. We do need the public to support us. There's just no question of that.
I was going to say in our last, as we close here, how can people get involved? Naked self-promotion. I would say folks need to read your Right to Know report that WashCog has produced. So how can people get involved?
Well, they can, first of all, sign up for our newsletter. Or just for our emails. We send out a newsletter quarterly, but we also, like for instance, we send out an Olympia Watch every Monday during the session. And that sometimes comes with an action alert that says, hey, call your legislator. We even include a link where you can find who your legislator is by putting in your address. And it allows people to take action and take part, and that's what we really want. We want them to take part. Read our annual report, see what we did last year.
Yeah.
We put stories online, we have information there, and we still have a helpline. I mean, we're not there to solve necessarily individual problems, but we definitely can help let you know what's in the law.
Yep.
And you'll probably get me on the phone, and then I'll find people who know stuff. But there are a lot of opportunities to take part, and those opportunities are going to increase as we grow and expand.
And I think reading the stories of key award winners and how a lot of them are kind of accidental activists sometimes. Some of them are, establishment people who do a great thing, or reporters, sure.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of average folks too who have proven that they can use the power of this state's transparency laws to affect real change.
There are.
Yeah.
And we should say that we are nonpartisan, independent, and we're not part of the government. And in this day and age with so much hyperpartisanship, being nonpartisan is something the public really values. And we work hard at it because our board is made up of people who have very strong opinions on all kinds of political issues.
Yeah.
That stays out of the room. All we care about in the room is open government.
Great conversation. I appreciate all of you coming to Northwest Now. As I say every year for the past 14 years, you guys have been instrumental, and I think doing a great deal of public education here on this program.
Well, and you have too.
Yeah, we appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you for the time.
Yep, thank you. A quick note, another good source for open government news is Joe Kunzler's blog on Beehive at advocatescorner.beehive.com. Everybody supports open government on paper, but not so much in practice. The bottom line, I'm guessing the voters of Washington are eventually going to have to go back to the initiative process to rein in the purveyors of secrecy, despite the fact the Public Disclosure Act of 1972 remains crystal clear. My thanks to the Washington Coalition for Open Government for the Anderson Award and their participation across all these many years. I hope this program, as always, got you thinking and talking. You can find this program on the web at kbtc.org, stream it through the PBS app, or listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. That's going to do it for this edition of Northwest Now. Until next time, I'm Tom Layson. Thanks for watching.